Hello my friends, John LaRuffa here with another rule speed through, and tonight we are going to be taking a look at Expedition to Newdale. This is a game that has a bit of a legacy aspect, sort of. It's played over several chapters, so it's not really a legacy in the fact that you destroy components, but each game, if you play the campaign, will bring in new elements, and there are a couple of branching paths from what I can tell. So I'm going to go ahead and give a rule speed through, and I'm going to look at the game starting from chapter 2, so there's a couple of elements in play already just to help us with some of the rules. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so a couple things to begin with. You always start with a hand of cards, and as the setup tells you, you draw 8 cards first, then you're going to discard 3 of those cards, whichever ones you don't think are going to work for you in the beginning, and so I'm just going to randomly discard those 3, and that'll leave you with 5 cards for your starting hand. And with these 5 cards, you will begin the game, and let's just go over quickly what's on the card, if you remember. So here we have the victory points. That's how much the card is worth once you build it at the end of the game. This is the cost in gold. Sometimes the cards, of which I don't have one right here, but one like this, may have a discount, if you remember that. The discount will correspond to where you're building on the board. So for instance, this one gives you a discount when you build it in a location that has a water icon on it, which several of these spots do. You'll start the game in a specific spot, depending on what map, what chapter you're in. And when you begin, you're going to run through these different phases right here. You'll also have 2 different tiles that'll start the board on your board at the beginning, which will kind of make these 2 different situations a little more expensive. You'll begin with a certain number of houses per the setup scenario. Then there's these good markers right here that will indicate how much your goods you get throughout the game as you play. On the board lets you build out and expand as you build new buildings. You have to place these little houses in each of the spots, and it depends on how far you go. In the beginning of the game, you're able to move 1 or 2 spaces away from your starting town. If you move 1 space away from your starting town, you will get the option to take this bonus if there's one available. If you move 2 spaces away, you will not get the bonus. And if you have this tile peeled off, then you will get a bonus of that, as can be seen here, where it says now 2 spaces away, up to 2, you can get the bonus tile, up to 3, you cannot. And that's just a little reminder there on these different spots right here as far as building. These slots over here are what you start the game with. One of them will actually have a coal card in that slot. And so you're going to begin the game with a coal card, which I should have put in there in the beginning. Who knows where the darn things are? Shuffled someplace. Anyway, the coal card will be in there, and you'll be able to begin the game with that in the spot. Right now, I have to find one. But that's how the game will start, with one over there. So I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so now we have the coal card and the 5 starting coal on there. If you remember on these cards, anything that is in this area here, any of these wooden cubes represent how many of these specific things you have. Also, these are worth that amount of money throughout the game. This icon here tells you what you can do when you chain production in, so what resource you can use. If you have a person producing, one of your workers producing in this building, what you need to make it, or if you have different assistants in the market, what will need to be done to produce this outright. So let's talk about that in a second. So the first thing you're going to do every turn is you're going to flip over one of these event cards. That event card is going to tell you to do something. In this case, it's telling you to add buildings to an open display. A display sometimes will allow you to build cards. Instead of from your hand, you can also build them from a face-up display. And when you do that, you're going to deal cards off this deck, and you're going to kind of lay them out one at a time. That's the first thing it does. It also shows you the specifics of which assistants are going to be in the market, which you're going to be able to use depending on the buildings you have. So, for instance, this card right here shows 2 yellows, a red, 2 greens. And so no matter what, I'm going to have access to those when it's time to build. Okay, so that's really important to know. That's the first thing, is drawing the event. Now, the second thing that's going to happen is you're going to place all available workers. In the beginning of the game, you have worker 1 and worker 2. Worker 1 is going to take the actions first. Worker 2 is going to go second. This is more important, of course, in a multiplayer game, but it works as a solo. Just you follow the order 1, 2, then 3. And you can put them in a variety of places. If you decide to put them in these spots right here, that means that you are going to try to work this card. And depends on how you decide to do it, will depend on how many cubes this will produce. So if you produce in a spot that is a minus, that means that you can produce on this card. So if I was to put this here, I'd be able to produce on this card with 1 assistant less. So I would either be able to completely ignore the requirement of the red and just do 2 yellows, or I could do 1 yellow and 1 red. And so that's what that means. Obviously, if you put them on these other spots, you have to do additional workers of the colors that are present, and you will then yield additional goods. So if I was to put it on here, I'd have to have 2 more additional workers of those colors, and then when the time came to produce, I would remove this and I would add 4 cubes. Now let's say the situation happened where I could not produce because I overextended myself. If that was to happen, then I would either fail to produce and get nothing out of the production from this, or I could discard cards from my hand to make up lost workers. And as you can see, you start the game, 3 cards from your hand makes up 1 lost worker for 1 specific building. If you upgrade this later on in the game, you can reduce the rate to 2 and make it easier for you to do that. And so that's kind of how that production works over here. The other thing that can happen on the production is the chain effect. If you decide, if you put 1 here, and whether it succeeds or fails, it doesn't matter. But if you have a card that has a coal on the side, so for instance, if I had this card and I put a guy over here, when the time is to use this action and produce, I could discard this and it would allow me to produce 1 coal like that. Additionally, whenever you do a chain production like that, you will get an additional 1. So it'll be 1 coal for the card and 1 coal for the additional production bonus. You always get a bonus of just 1 good when you do a chain, no matter what. It doesn't matter if you discarded 7 cards here, you get 7 plus 1 is 8. The other thing you could do is a direct transfer over. So if I had a card that was actually producing those kinds of goods, so for instance, one of these cards that's making ore here, you can find it. So you can tell there's lots of cards in the game. I can't seem to find one. Let me see. All right. You get a little component preview here for all the different things. No. No, that's still not the same one. Okay, if I had one that was, let's say, needed something like this, where it needed coal and it needed that, okay? So if that's the case, then I could have a production situation like this, where I am producing those particular things here. So I have an ore mine making ore, and I have a coal mine. And if I had this situation just like this, and I wanted to produce a chain reaction, I could decide to take one of these goods representing this particular symbol and one of these goods representing this particular symbol and turn those into one of those. Again, I would have to have a marker on here to actually allow for that. And just because I did that conversion, I would always get the +1 bonus. So that's how you can do that. You can do the pair, you can do the single from the buildings, or you can discard cards if it shows the card icon like that. So that's a specific icon that goes with cards only. And so that's kind of a little bit about buildings. I got off track a little bit to explain that early, but that's one of the main actions of this game, and it's important to know that you do that, although you take that action when it's time for number 4. So we'll kind of go back to that. The other things that you can place your cards down or your discs on are all these different spaces right here. So I'll explain those in just a minute. So again, you're going to assign these workers here on one of these spaces before you draw any workers from the bag. And so during that assignment phase, you're putting out those workers and planning. You are allowed to plan to work something you haven't yet built. So you could put this here knowing that you're going to build a card in that slot. And so that's kind of the way you put these out. If on subsequent turns you've gotten access to the 3 or the 4 through different actions, you also will put those out as well before proceeding to step 3. Now let's talk about step 3. In step 3, all we're going to do is draw 4 workers or more out of the bag. Always 4. Sometimes the cards will say differently. So if I was to draw 4 workers out here, I would have this situation like this, and these 4 workers would then add to these and tell me what I'm capable of building. So in this case, if I was going to go ahead and build right here, I would need 2 yellow and 3 green. Well, I have 4 yellow and 3 green, so I'm good to go. I can build on that. In this case, I'd need 2 red and 2 green, pardon me. So if I had maybe my marker 3 over here on the +1, I would actually need an additional one. So let's say I needed this and I did 4 green, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's those 2. But I need 2 red. I don't have it. I would have to discard again from my hand 3 cards in order to make that happen. And by doing that, I would produce a single batch of this, depending on what I've got here. So this shows me 3 batches, so I would produce 3, and then I would remove that. Okay, so again, that's kind of how these workers work. Now, in phase 4, we're actually going to execute our actions one at a time. I've already thoroughly gone through what happens when you build, so I'm not going to, and I should say produce, pardon me, when you produce, so I'm not going to go back over that. These actions are as follows. First of all, if I produce over, or if I pick this spot over here, I'll just bring this up here for you to see a little bit better. If I pick this spot over here, I can spend 7 coins to get my number 3, or I can spend 13 coins to get my number 4 and take an additional 3 points. You can do these in either order, but the 4 always activates after the 3. If I go to this spot right here, I'm going to spend 2 cards from my hand one time to get 4 units of coal on my coal mine, plus 1 unit of something else on any of the cards that I have built. It doesn't matter whether I have people on them to produce or not, any of the cards. If I use this action, I can take either this spot, or both. I have to do it in this order though. I can discard some cards from my hand, holding and remaining 1, and then replenish them. So let's say I had a hand of 5 cards. I could discard, let's say, 4 cards out of that hand, retain the 1, replace the 4 from the draw deck, and after replacing the 4 from the draw deck, then I would gain an additional 3 cards. If I go here, I spend 4 coins, and I'm able to upgrade one of my upgrade markers right here and just remove that to get a better conversion, either from a standpoint of more movement on the board or discarding fewer cards to make up workers. And then finally over here, if I take this action, I'm able to build a card during this phase right here, phase 4. And that allows me to build a card, and let's talk about how we do that in phase 5, which is a free action that everyone gets. So in phase 5, we're going to build 1 card or take 2 cards from the deck, your choice. If you build 1 card, you have to be able to pay the cash on the spot. Again, the cash might be discounted, and to pay the cash, you're going to discard cubes from these cards that are on the board that will equal this sum. Okay, so if I was to build right here, there is no bonus or benefit over here in this case. There's nothing. So I would have to pay the 8 coins. So I have to come up with 8, and I could do this 4, 8. That would be my 8 coins. Or I could go 2, 4, 6. Or some combination, 7, 8, whatever I wanted to do. You don't get change, but that's how you are paying for it. And then in this case, at the end of the game, or then I would put this card in one of my slots, doesn't matter which slot you want, and that would be available then for you to use as a production building for the next phase. And then you would decide where you want to put it. Again, you're either moving 1 space away, taking this bonus tile. The bonus tiles have various effects. They're one-time use once you use them, and you can use them at any time in the game when they're allowed. You flip them over and they're done. Or if I move 2 spaces away and haven't unlocked this, like for instance, if I go 1, 2, then I would put it over here. Now, why would I want to move further out instead of just moving closely? Well, that has to do with the secret objective. So everyone's going to have a secret objective, and in these objectives, everyone's going to have this situation right here where you're going to get 2 points for every one of these icons that you build next to, and those are kind of deep into the map, and then 2 points for some other icon. In this case, it would be the stars, which you can find on some of these different things throughout the board. So there's 1, 2, and 3 up there. So you might want to expand a little faster and forego the bonus tiles. And so that is how you build, and you always get to build in phase 5 if you can afford it. If you can't or you don't want to, you can choose 2 cards. Then in phase 6, you're going to activate some buildings that are over here. And some buildings in phase 6 will have something like this, for instance, a situation where it says put 1 corn on here for free, and that corn is worth $2. So that is a card that came up in the first chapter of the game, and that's what happens here. Some of these other ones don't activate that way. So for instance, the small watchtower does not allow for any activation during the game. It sits there and it's a requirement. In the solo game, you are required to do whatever you're supposed to do at the end here. So in this case, you need to fulfill these conditions for the end of the game. And if you do, you also have to have both of these conditions in order to actually pass, in this case, chapter 2. If you don't win, you have to redo the chapter in the solo game. If you do win, you can go on to the extra. A couple other things to mention. Sometimes there's a character pool. You'll get to draw and choose one character and get that specific bonus throughout the game, or a one-time deal depending on what it is. So that's another thing that happens. Also, here is the variant, or the scoring track. Every time you cross over one of these areas right here, you will get 2 cards whenever they say 2 cards. Some of them don't say 2 cards. There's specific slots that have those. After you've gotten to 50 points, you flip this back over and continue scoring, but you do not gain the 2 extra cards again. So that's just kind of a beginning game bonus. One other thing I didn't mention when it was time to build, in some of these spots, you'll see a little shield. You'll get those points immediately when you build on those spots for the shield. In general, any shield that is gold with no victory arches around it, like so right here, those give you immediate points. The other ones are points at the end of the game. So you get those at the end when you're doing the final scoring. Other than that, that should be all the rules. And lastly, I forgot to mention, when you're cleaning up at the end of the step, you're going to go ahead and you're going to put back these workers that you drew. You're going to discard this, and then you're going to begin again. And that's going to be kind of the end of the round cleanup for the game itself. The game is played in 7 rounds. After the 7th round, you'll reveal the final event, which will tell you what the final round is. And in that case, it'll tell you what you need to do to complete, how you score, what happens if you win or lose, and basically kind of wrap up the game. If you win the game as a solo, you can proceed to the next chapter. If you lose the game as a solo, then you have to redo the chapter. Overall, the game is pretty straightforward, and I hope that this reminder, this speed through, helped you remember how to play if you've already read the rules, and get this back to the table quickly. All right, so hopefully that helped you understand how to refresh your memory on how to play Expedition to Newdale. Again, this is a pretty good game. I really enjoy it. I like the fact that there is a campaign aspect to it, and the play is relatively quick, but there's some really good decisions here to make. So hopefully this video was helpful to you getting the game back to the table. And again, my name is John LaRuffa, and this has been a Rules Speed Through, and I hope you have a great day. Please like and subscribe, as it really helps me a lot if you enjoy this video. Take care.